In Crothersville, Indiana, police investigating a missing persons case made a gruesome discovery.
There was a body. We didn't know the cause of death at that time, but her hands are tied behind her back.
Suddenly, the police had a murder on their hands, and the killer was still at large.
That kind of violent crime just wasn't heard of around here.
We clearly had a murderer in the community.
As well as the police, others also chronicled the investigation, on film, on paper, and on tape. Through their lenses, they captured the story of a child killer. Crothersville, Indiana, is a quiet and peaceful community in the heart of the American Midwest. With a population of only 1,500, the town is made up mainly of hard-working farmers and factory workers.
It's a fairly small community, like any other little town. Quiet, everybody knew everybody.
It's Indiana farm country. There's a lot of creeks and small rivers running through the area.
For many years, the entire area of Jackson County, Indiana, had enjoyed a low crime rate.
We used to like to say people would move here because this is peaceful and quiet and relatively crime-free. In 2005, an occasional theft, a break-in, of course, drug usage. Murder hadn't happened here in probably 30, 40 years.
January 2005. On the west side of town, John Neese and his wife Angie lived with their two daughters, Jessica and 10-year-old Caitlin, nicknamed Katie for short. The baby of the family, Katie was well known for her outgoing nature, her ready smile, and her love for her dog.
She loved collaring, playing, riding a bicycle, playing with her dog, friends. Katie was like a normal 10-year-old child. She loved playing, respectful, happy child.
She was a 10-year-old, joyful, very outgoing, gregarious individual. Never met a stranger she didn't like.
On the 25th of January 2005, Katie got a ride to school with her father, John.
Dropped her off and told her that I loved her and I'd see her that evening.
The afternoon passed quietly without incident. The only sound was children's laughter as the local school let out its pupils for the day.
When school was over, she returned home. Her mother asked her to run an errand at a nearby store, no more than, I would say, 250 yards from where she lived.
The shopkeeper recognized Katie from the neighborhood and helped her with her purchase. At 4 o'clock, when Katie hadn't come home from the shops, John and Angie Neese began to worry.
I went into work at 3 o'clock that day, and later that evening, my wife had called me and said that Katie was gone. I said, "What do you mean she's gone?" Then she told me that she went to the dollar store and didn't ever come back. I immediately called the sheriff's department.
The initial information that was received was that she was last seen walking away from the store, heading towards what's called Coventer Street in Crothersville, Indiana. And that was around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And nobody had seen her since.
The police immediately sent out search parties to look for Katie Coleman.
Their response was to go out, canvass the neighborhood, see if they could locate her. Consequently, the Jackson County Sheriff's Department became involved. The Indiana State Police Department became involved.
News of Katie's disappearance spread quickly amongst the residents of Crothersville.
Their reaction was much like what you would expect for a missing child. They were upset. They organized, at first, local efforts to find Katie.
You know, everyone was involved and worried about her and interested in finding Katie again.
As different leads would come in, I had a lot of times to talk mostly with John Neese over at his house and giving me some information, some possibilities of where she might be or who she would be with.
My first thought was that she was probably a runaway.
The police spoke to John and Angie Neese, who insisted their youngest daughter would never have run away from home.
She had loving parents. She had a family that cared very much about her.
As the night wore on, fears about Katie's disappearance gripped the community. At the Neese home, John and Angie were facing every parent's worst nightmare.
I told my wife to stay by the phone because Katie knew the phone number. And if she was at a friend's house, maybe she went to sleep and fell asleep and she'd show up at school the next morning. I said, just in case, stay by the phone. I mean, I was very shook up because it's my daughter, you know, and I didn't know where she was at.
Angie waited anxiously at home while the search parties continued to hunt for her daughter.
The community rallied around the search for Katie and around Katie and her family tremendously. Fire Station was used as the headquarters for the investigation, and people from the community brought in all kinds of food for the searchers.
For the next 48 hours, the search teams worked around the clock looking for Katie.
A lot of the community spent sleepless hours too, searching for Katie. Pretty much looked everywhere we could think of.
I initially went and checked a few areas, some areas, you know, that hadn't been checked yet. Got a picture of her and was showing around to a few of the communities a little bit away from there and just asking people or just looking for any possible leads. Anybody might have seen her.
On the 27th of January, with no sign of Katie and very few leads, the FBI was brought in. Special Agent Tony Seidel led the investigation.
We established a tip line, and an Amber Alert went out after we became actively involved in the investigation. So there's a lot of information that was coming in from the public that had to be assessed.
Agent Seidel sifted through the information to piece together Katie's movements on the afternoon of her disappearance.
Along the way, we determined she stopped at an apartment building that was along the route that she would have traveled. She went to the Dollar General store. She returned by the same route, returning to the same apartment complex.
The police discovered Katie had gone to a nearby apartment block to visit school friends just after 4 p.m. Officials believed this was the last time anyone had seen Katie. Tips from the public continued to pour in.
But one of the things that comes along with every Amber Alert is that people call if they have any inkling that they might be in possession of useful information. So yes, there were a lot of tips that came in from the public. Every single one of those tips was investigated. Every single one.
On the 28th of January, an eyewitness came forward and said she'd seen Katie in a white pickup truck driven by an unknown man.
The woman recognized Katie, but did not recognize the driver of a white pickup truck. And that struck her as a little odd. And thank goodness she was a very observant woman, and she was able to give the police an excellent description of the man.
We followed that lead. A composite sketch was prepared of the driver of that vehicle. We had some physical characteristics we were looking for in both the truck and the driver of the vehicle.
Where the initial composite was put out was that, you know, even to the description of a white Ford F-150, gave a description of a skinny white male, you know, possibly wearing glasses and was smoking a cigarette.
Armed with this eyewitness account, the police focused their investigation on locating the pickup truck.
Well, the first thing they did was run through the State Bureau of Motor Vehicle records to find every white pickup truck and then hunted those people down and talked to them about what happened.
The police released the composite sketch of the driver to the media. The image of the slender white male appeared on television reports and in newspapers across the state. Investigators interviewed several men who fitted the description, but none of them could be connected to the crime. With each passing day, the police hoped for the best, but began to suspect the worst.
You just kind of get that feeling that this is not looking good, and then 2 or 3 days pass, then you kind of shift gears into a different mode.
My initial reaction was, well, she's probably with a friend, or maybe she's mad and ran away and, is hiding out someplace there in town, and she'll turn up in a day or two. But when that didn't happen, it was obvious that something bad had happened to her.
The investigation grew in size and scope. Several police departments across the state were now actively involved in the search for Katie.
She was missing, so they were looking all over the place here in town, and then eventually expanded that to some of the more rural areas.
On the 30th of January, while patrolling an area 20 miles north of Crothersville, State Trooper Martin Meade spotted something in Cypress Lake.
We got the call at about 10 o'clock on Saturday morning at our command post.
He had spotted something that he believed might be a body that was in a spillway on the south side of Cypress Lake. And Cypress Lake is an area where they have found bodies in the past.
What had begun as a routine inspection of the area had resulted in the discovery of the most shocking murder the people of Crothersville had witnessed in over 40 years. The 30th of January 2005, Crothersville, Indiana. 10-year-old Katie Coleman had been missing for 5 days. The FBI had issued an Amber Alert for Katie, while the local police continued to work around the clock, chasing leads and processing tips from the public. While patrolling an area 20 miles north of Crothersville, State Trooper Martin Meade had spotted something in Cypress Lake. Investigators rushed to the scene.
I went up and spoke with Marty, and he pointed out what he was looking at, and it was very difficult to see what he was seeing.
It was a body dressed similarly to how Katie was, approximately the same size as Katie's size.
I've heard the last known description of her wearing a light blue coat, like a down coat. You could see that in the water.
When the state police divers came in and they got into the water and pulled Katie's body out, and it was confirmed that it was Katie, and it was just sad. A lot of people standing around had tears in their eyes, me included.
The discovery of Katie's body closed one chapter in the investigation and forced the police to change the focus of their hunt.
We have to completely change gears to a homicide investigation, find out who did this to this girl.
Battling the cold January weather, the police worked quickly and efficiently to secure the area, documenting every element of the crime scene exactly as it was found.
I had a little small camera, just trying to take some pictures of how the scene was laid out. We had an evidence technician that came and took photographs there.
Crime scene investigator Chris Lewis was one of the first to arrive at the lake.
Part of the job of a crime scene investigator is documentation of that scene, which is still photography, video keeping of the scene. So you can basically recreate this scene at other places for other people. You want to be able to document where exactly the body was, the position of the body, condition of the body.
She was still completely clothed, and I don't remember seeing any external injuries, where you could see any knife wounds or, bullet holes or anything else.
Special Agent Tony Seidel led the team of experts collecting physical evidence.
The Indiana State Police evidence technicians recovered a large amount of debris from along the route that led to Cypress Lake. They spent hours combing those areas, searching for anything that might have been discarded that might link Katie to the scene or to the individuals that were responsible for Katie being deposited there.
Being a public area with 24-hour access to the public, there was a lot of potential evidence there. What a normal person may consider trash, soda cans, beer cans, straws, cigarette butts, documents, ATM receipts.
And it was all collected, cataloged, photographed, noted where it was found. A very professional and thorough job on everything that was picked up was done there because, as it turned out, they were going to do DNA testing on all of the objects that seemed appropriate for that.
Katie's murder shook even the most experienced police officers.
The circumstances of the recovery of her body in a body of water with her hands bound behind her back was very overwhelming for the investigators, I think, and perhaps for the evidence technicians. I know they see a lot of really bad things, but I was seeing a lot of grief in the investigators.
I don't know that you're ever ready to see a little girl being pulled out of water. I think that initially as you're doing this, you're holding on to some type of hope that, she might be alive and, you can get a return to her parents. But then to see as they're bringing her body across the water, you can see her hands behind her back.
News of the discovery of Katie's body spread quickly through the town. Faced with a child killer in their community, the people of Crothersville reacted with shock, fear, and anger.
Everybody was outraged. Her classmates from school were upset. The parents of other children were upset. When you live in a small town like that, you have a certain sense of security that while children may be abducted and murdered somewhere else, it doesn't happen in Crothersville, Indiana.
I'm not sure how you deal with the loss of a child, let alone the murder of a child.
The FBI came to the house along with the chief of police here in town, and they informed us that they had found a body. And my heart fell plumb out of my body. Quite honestly, I wanted to die. And then I wanted to find out whoever done it.
News media from across the United States descended on Crothersville to report on the story of the murdered schoolgirl. The town was overwhelmed by the sudden attention.
The coverage here was unheard of. This is a small community, and we may on occasion get a regional news coverage here, but we had every TV station from Kentucky to Indianapolis here shooting footage with their trucks and all.
Word leaked out to the media. We always talked about what was going to be released. There was a formal press conference later that same day. The release was limited to the body had been recovered, where it had been recovered, and the fact that the investigation was continuing.
At the Kentucky State Medical Examiner's office, forensic scientists performed a lengthy post-mortem on Katie's body. The results provided some crucial clues to the mystery surrounding her murder.
We have the cause of death as drowning. That means we have a murder scene right there at Cypress Lake instead of somewhere else.
The post-mortem revealed further key details that helped investigators piece together the puzzle.
Her body was evaluated for trace evidence in the forms of hairs, fibers. We collected red fibers from Katie Coleman's torso at the autopsy.
Every piece of microscopic evidence was collected and catalogued. There was another devastating but important discovery made during the post-mortem.
There were samples and stuff taken from the autopsy that there was the presence of semen that was found, that we knew that she had been sexually assaulted.
At the State Police Laboratory, forensic scientist Paulita McGuire developed a DNA profile from the evidence.
It was consistent with an unknown male individual at that time. So we did have some of the material present. We did have a DNA profile from that, but at the time, we did not know whose DNA that was.
The police began to build a profile of the unknown murderer using the evidence from the crime scene and psychological profiling.
There are not many people who will kidnap, sexually assault, and murder a 10-year-old child who has not in some meaningful way interacted with them previously. Clearly the murder was done to cover up his guilt and for no other reason.
Now tasked with catching a child rapist and killer, Special Agent Tony Seidel redoubled his efforts.
From that point, I requested and received a list of all the registered sex offenders for bordering counties and within Jackson County, and then we cross-referenced that to individuals, registered sex offenders who might have had access to or had white Ford F-150s.
But on the 2nd of February, the case took an unexpected turn, with a startling confession to the murder of 10-year-old Katie Coleman. The 2nd of February, Jackson County, Indiana. The police were investigating the rape and murder of a local schoolgirl, Katie Coleman, found dead in a lake 20 miles from her home. After a week spent following leads and tips from the public, investigators got a sudden break in the case. 20-year-old Crothersville resident Charles Chucky Hickman called the police with a confession.
On February the 2nd, he confessed to being responsible for Katie's death. Details that he had that fit with what we knew based upon our investigation relative to her knowing that she had drowned. We hadn't released that.
Armed with his confession, the police got ready to make an arrest. Unemployed and a known drug user, Charles Hickman had a reputation for being less than credible. But the police could not afford to take any lead lightly. They interrogated Hickman, careful not to reveal too much about the crime.
What you try to do is hold back something that the public wouldn't know, and in this case it was the fact that Katie's hands were tied behind her and the manner in which they were tied.
He told us how she had drowned, where she drowned. Individuals involved identified the white Ford F-150 that was used to transport her to Cypress Lake.
He had a home right there in the main drag, not far from where Katie lived, so he would certainly have known Katie. We examined the information. We presented a probable cause hearing with several police officers in front of Judge Vance, who then issued an arrest warrant, and Chucky Hickman was charged.
In the first of several interviews, Charles Hickman told the police that on the afternoon of the 25th of January, Katie Coleman had accidentally witnessed his illegal drug use on her way home from the shop.
The apartment building that Katie had visited had an apartment, at least one apartment in there that was involved in the production or manufacture of methamphetamine, and also the use of methamphetamine, that she had perhaps encountered individuals using or producing methamphetamine. They panicked.
He came forward and confessed to the murder, claiming that Katie had been brought to his home.
Hickman told investigators that he and his friends had tied Katie's hands behind her back to intimidate her into not going to the police.
He claimed that he had taken her to Cypress Lake to scare her, and he couldn't recall whether she had fallen into Cypress Lake or if he had accidentally bumped her into Cypress Lake.
And that she died because of that. Hickman's story was that she had accidentally fallen in and drowned, which was consistent with the way the body was recovered.
The police immediately began to build their case against Hickman by compiling the evidence.
He frequented the apartment complex where we know she was last seen. He was friends with the occupants there. He had a friend who had a white F-150 truck.
But despite the strong links, investigators began to question several inconsistencies in Hickman's confession.
Some of the things that he was saying from the very beginning didn't match up. Composite came out shortly after she was missing, didn't match Chucky Hickman.
I think there was some disbelief just because everyone pretty much knew Chucky. He was a high school dropout, didn't work, just hung out.
Most importantly, the semen taken from Katie's body did not match the DNA sample provided by Hickman. This was undeniable proof of his innocence. Frustrated, the police shifted their focus again.
When Hickman was arrested, we thought at that moment that we had solved the case. However, that turned out that we didn't have the case solved. We weren't even close. We were fooled. For some reason that I certainly don't understand, maybe out of some misguided desire to have the case solved, came in and gave a confession.
Chucky Hickman made the whole thing up. His confession was based upon what he had read in the newspapers and what he had seen on TV. That's probably one of the other big questions of this whole tragedy. Why would you admit to a murder you didn't commit?
Eventually, Charles Chucky Hickman was cleared of all charges relating to the murder of Katie Coleman. The people of Crothersville reacted with shock and anger.
I was just beside myself. I just couldn't believe that we had one person that had confessed to killing a 10-year-old child and then being told that, no, he's actually not the one that killed her.
With a child killer still at large, fear and paranoia gripped the small Indiana community.
Everybody started keeping a closer eye on their children because they realized just how fragile the peace is and what a slim line there is between your child's safety and a brutal and vicious death.
Under pressure to make up for lost time, investigators continued to pursue drivers of white pickup trucks and to process the evidence recovered from the crime scene.
I looked at over 300 items of evidence. The actual amount of evidence was overwhelming because there were so many different leads in the case and we were going in so many different directions for a while. DNA evidence is very accurate because no two people have the exact same DNA except for identical twins.
Forensic scientists concentrated their efforts on identifying DNA from the cigarette butts found close to where Katie's body had been discovered.
There were 10 collected from the actual crime scene. It was brought up that maybe we should just test the ones that were closest to Katie's body. But the difference between 2 cigarette butts and 10 cigarette butts to a DNA analyst is minimal. I'd rather just do all 10 of them. And one of those actually came back and matched the seminal material found in Katie's body. And it actually ended up being one of the ones that was furthest away from her body that we got the match on the cigarette butt to.
Well, that was very big for a few reasons. It placed whoever molested Katie at the scene where she was killed.
What we did not know was who had committed the crime.
The cigarette with the matching DNA was a rare brand, available only from specialist shops.
It was a brand that I hadn't heard of. I talked to other investigators. They had not heard of that brand. So we contacted the manufacturer of the brand, determined that there were 4 local distributors of that particular brand, and notified them, requested their assistance.
I met with the managers there and I requested that they call me if somebody came in here buying Rogers cigarettes. It wasn't very long after that I received a call, and the message was that a white male, they came into their store and purchased a carton of Roger Light 100s. Said didn't get his name, but he was driving a white Ford F-150, and here's the plate.
State Trooper Rob Simpson ran a check on the number plate through a dispatcher.
And the plate returned to Anthony Stockelman, and I knew he was a person of interest early on. So I called to the command center and talked to Tony and said, hey, you know, this is what it is, and this is who it's come back to. I mean, you know, this could be something good.
The police now focus their investigation on Anthony Stockelman, a factory worker from the nearby town of Seymour, Indiana.
Went to his residence and recontacted him to determine if he would consent to a sample of DNA.
And I remember pulling up to his house. We went to go interview him, and as soon as we drove in, I seen the white Ford F-150. And again, it was even described as an older white Ford truck, you know, and it was, you know, everything matched, you know, just completely the way that was initially described to us by this witness.
I think he was shocked that we were back. He thought he was home free. He knew one individual had been arrested, had confessed, and he thought he was off the hook.
The police questioned Stockelman at his house. Insisting he was innocent, Stockelman repeated his story from the first interview, telling the police why he'd been in Crothersville at the time of Katie's disappearance.
What took him to this particular location at the time of Katie's disappearance was he was moving furniture out of a family member's residence. That's the reason he had his truck at that particular location. He did not volunteer any information except that he hadn't been to Cypress Lake in 8 to 10 years, so that he couldn't possibly be responsible for placing Katie's body up at Cypress Lake.
Stockelman willingly provided a sample of his DNA. It would prove his innocence or involvement in the crime.
This is a homicide of a 10-year-old child. DNA results can be obtained in just a couple days if that's all you're doing, that's all you're working on. In this particular case, I worked on it solid every day that I came in the laboratory.
The police waited impatiently for the results. The DNA findings could potentially resolve months of tough police investigation. The mood was tense.
You're in the DNA room. People don't just come in there. They're waiting outside for the results. Everyone kind of wanted to know if we had actually finally solved the case after we tested 73 male individuals. And 2 days later, I called them back and said, we have a match.
You know, I had cold chills when they said, we finally got this guy. You could just tell, but from his manner, that this is him.
Special Agent Seidel contacted local prosecutor Stephen Pearson and arranged for an affidavit for the arrest of Anthony Stockelman. As final proof of Stockelman's role in the murder, Seidel conducted a test using the rare brand of cigarette found at the crime scene.
In an effort to disprove what amounts to some kind of an alibi by Stockelman, Tony Seidel set up an experiment where he put cigarette butts out and exposed them in the same area at the same time of year.
I had already determined from the manufacturer that it was only available in the area for approximately the last 5 years. I also determined that it was not possible for his cigarette to have survived out there for 8 to 10 years. That cigarette would have degraded to the point that it wouldn't have been recoverable.
With an arrest warrant in hand, the police prepared to close in on Anthony Stockelman. Trooper Rob Simpson and FBI Special Agent Tony Seidel drove to Stockelman's house to make the arrest.
Upon our arrival, nobody was home at that time. We was kind of sitting there watching the place, and I called him on his cell phone.
Detective Simpson asked him where he was at because we needed to speak further with him about his DNA.
He said, well, you know, he was down at the karate studio with his son. He agreed that, yeah, come by and, you know, we could talk again. So Tony and I are the only ones that went over there to meet him. Again, we don't want to do anything to spook him too bad. Plus, he's in a karate studio with other kids and don't know what his mindset is. And obviously, our belief is that he killed Katie Coleman.
Stockelman was waiting for the officers in the car park outside the karate studio. He agreed to get in their car. Detective Rob Simpson began to drive to another isolated car park.
Tony was in the front seat passenger side, and Anthony Stockelman was sitting right behind Tony. And Agent Seidel reached around and said, you know, shake my hand. And so he did that and grabbed a hold of his right hands, and and we have an arrest warrant for you, and you're under arrest for, the molestation of Katie Coleman.
On the 7th of April 2005, Anthony Stockelman was arrested without incident and put in jail, where he was held without bail. Throughout his interrogations, Stockelman maintained his innocence.
Tony Stockelman was not informed that his DNA was on the cigarette that was recovered at that particular time. He was informed that his DNA had been recovered from the body of Katie Coleman. His response was incredulous. He didn't understand how it could be on Katie Coleman. He did not even know her. He'd never spoken to her.
A press conference was held to release the news of Stockelman's arrest. Once again, the small town was besieged by reporters from across America.
We were inundated with network news, large city daily papers. At times it was a media circus. The large trucks with TV, antennas, cameras were a regular feature here in Crothersville for a while. It was something totally different than we'd ever had before.
With the accused rapist and murderer Anthony Stockelman safely behind bars, the authorities prepared for what would be a difficult and controversial trial. With Charles Hickman having confessed to the crime, would the prosecution's case stand up in court? Charged with the sexual assault and murder of 10-year-old Katie Coleman, factory worker Anthony Stockelman was behind bars awaiting trial.
I had my suspect, and I started working on the trial immediately because we did ask for the death penalty initially, and that takes an incredible amount of work.
Prosecutors set to work building their case and sifting through the evidence.
We had a witness who said that they saw Katie in a white Ford F-150 truck within approximately half an hour of her disappearance. The composite sketch was Tony Stockelman, a tall, thin, white man, short hair, smoking.
Furthermore, Stockelman's alibi that he'd been helping his mother move out of her house now provided the police with further proof of his guilt.
He was at the residence 137 feet from where Katie was last seen.
At least have class characteristics on several of the fibers collected from Katie Coleman's clothing and her body that matched back to the class characteristics to the red fibers in the carpeting of Anthony Stockelman's mother's home.
In my mind, that sealed the fate of Tony Stockelman. What that told us was the sexual assault occurred in the back bedrooms on that red carpet. But the definitive evidence was the DNA evidence.
I never had a case that was so heavily dependent on DNA as this one was. There were 3 sources of the same DNA. They had taken a swab from Stockelman himself. They had DNA from the cigarette butt, and they had DNA from the semen found on Katie's body.
Despite the evidence against Anthony Stockelman, there were several challenges facing the prosecution. When the police had first questioned Stockelman, his wife had provided a solid alibi.
Initially, she backed him. In fact, I think it was her quote, I back him 100%. She stood beside him and said, that I know he didn't do this, but that wasn't real long. But she was convinced that, I think just from the fact, not by us, we didn't go try to convince him. I think just from knowing of the facts that we had against him, that, he was lying.
But the biggest challenge was the confession from Charles Chucky Hickman.
I fully expected that the defense would try to point the finger at Chucky Hickman and say he confessed, he's the one that did this, pay no attention to the DNA evidence, Chucky Hickman is the murderer, why are they picking on my client?
Prosecutor Stephen Pearson had a huge challenge ahead of him. Not only did he have to prove Stockelman's guilt beyond reasonable doubt, he also had to convince the jury of Hickman's innocence. But after months of negotiations, the case never made it to trial. On the advice of his lawyers, Anthony Stockelman accepted a plea bargain.
But he agreed to plead guilty again. I think it was in exchange for, life without parole instead of the death penalty.
The 20th of April 2006, the day of the hearing and sentencing of Anthony Stockleman. The mood in the packed courtroom was tense as the crowd waited for proceedings to start.
The courtroom was filled with family, friends, community members, and investigators that had a vested interest in this investigation. It was very emotional for all of the individuals who were sitting in the gallery in the courtroom, and for all the individuals that testified, because it was the culmination of months' worth of work.
Anthony Stockleman was brought into the packed courtroom. The crowd hushed and leaned in for a better look at the accused.
Everybody maintained a level of being calm throughout that, which I think couldn't imagine how difficult that would be, sitting there right across the room from someone who took your child away from you.
He was very stoic, he was very unemotional, seemed disinterested, seemed bored.
When he was brought in to the courtroom, I remember hearing someone yelling out, "Why'd you do it, Tony?" It was his wife. But he never answered why. And I think to this day, everyone is still wanting to know.
After a thorough presentation of the facts of the case, the presiding judge listened to a victim impact statement from Katie's father, John Neese.
I just told Judge, they want to say that Anthony's kids are the biggest losers in this whole ordeal. I beg to differ. They're actually the biggest winners, because they don't have to live their life wondering if their father's going to mistreat them. Katie was ultimately the biggest loser. She paid the ultimate price with her life.
After listening to all of the evidence and the testimonies, Judge Vance delivered his sentence.
The sentence that Stockleman received was life without parole for the murder of Katie Coleman. And I believe he received 30 years for the child molesting as well.
The community reacted strongly to the sentencing.
There are some folks in this and other communities that think because of the crime he committed against a 10-year-old girl that he ought to be put to death. My view, though, is sometimes there are things worse than death. And being in a prison as an admitted child molester, there is such a thing as jailhouse justice. It's swift, it's frequent, and there's no court of appeals.
The public is safe. Mr. Stockleman is not going to get out, and the Neese family is at peace.
His life in the free world will never be again. He can't get out here and hurt any more kids. He's just done.
Anthony Stockleman is behind bars for the rest of his life, with no possibility of parole. But for many, life in this peaceful Indiana town would never be the same.
I mean, we've had murders, but they're so infrequent, and they were adults then. This happened to a 10-year-old little girl, and it meant something different. It meant something more profound. It's just stripped away another layer of innocence that perhaps we could claim.
The death of Katie Coleman, the joyous little girl with a wide smile and generous spirit, has left a lasting impression on those involved.
Every time I drive by that lake, it all comes back. And I go by that lake all the time. Just a tough case.
What stands out most that I take with me on a daily basis in this case is the strength of community. The family is still an important part of the community down there, and I think it made that community stronger.
She's still here. I mean, she may not be here in body, but she's here in spirit. Every moment she's right here with us.